Chapter 4. The Shape of Safety. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 4. The Shape of Safety. Elara. Spring arrived gradually. The snow retreated from the northern hills. Trade routes reopened. Construction projects accelerated. The kingdom breathed a little easier. Not enough, but noticeably. For the first time in years, Elara found herself planning beyond immediate crises. The change should have felt encouraging. Instead, it felt strange. Survival had become familiar. Constant vigilance had become familiar. Disaster management had become familiar. Peace remained something she was still learning. Master healer Corvin once described trauma as a castle under siege. Even after the war ended, the guards remained on the walls. Years later, they still watched for enemies. Still expected attack. Still sounded alarms. The problem wasn't that the guards were wrong. The problem was that they never realized the siege had ended. She thought about that often, especially during quiet moments. Arjun. The reconstruction initiative expanded significantly by early spring. More roads, more supply lines, more coordination between regions, which meant more meetings. Arjun suspected at least half of governance involved attending meetings about future meetings. Some aspects of administration appeared universal across worlds. One afternoon, he found himself reviewing provincial maps with Elara in a smaller strategy chamber. The room overlooked palace gardens. Sunlight filtered through open windows. Birdsong drifted occasionally from outside. The setting felt almost peaceful. A rare thing. We should relocate the grain depot. Elara pointed toward a marked position. Arjun studied the map. Flood risk. Exactly. He nodded. For several minutes they worked in silence. Comfortable silence. A concept that had become increasingly common between them. Eventually Elara spoke again. Corvin says I should establish more routines. Arjun glanced up. The statement felt unusually personal. And what do you think? I think he asks impossible things. That surprised a laugh out of him. Her eyebrow lifted. You disagree? No. He folded his arms. I think most healers ask impossible things. To his surprise, she laughed too. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to soften the room. The sound disappeared quickly. Yet its absence felt noticeable afterward. Elara. The laughter lingered in her thoughts long after the meeting ended. Not because the joke had been particularly amusing. Because she had laughed at all. There had been a time when laughter came easily. Before the war. Before funerals became routine. Before every celebration carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. Those memories often felt distant. Belonging to someone else. Lately, however, moments occasionally surfaced. Small ones. Brief ones. Master Corvin called them signs of emotional reconnection. Elara called them confusing. Still, they existed. And that mattered. Arjun. Several weeks later, another problem emerged. Political pressure. Not directed at him. At Elara. The issue became obvious during a council session. A visiting noble from a neighboring kingdom spent half the meeting discussing trade agreements. The other half discussing marriage alliances. Poorly disguised marriage alliances. Arjun watched Elara's expression carefully. Not because he was personally invested. Because he recognized discomfort when he saw it. Her posture stiffened. Slightly. Her responses became shorter. More formal. The signs were subtle. Most people missed them. Unfortunately, the noble didn't. Or perhaps he simply ignored them. Surely your highness understands the importance of securing Valoria's future. A dangerous statement. Not openly disrespectful. Yet manipulative. The implication hung in the air. Everyone heard it. Silence followed. Then Elara spoke. Her voice remained calm. The future of Valoria is not dependent upon my marital status. The noble smiled politely. Of course not. However, no. The interruption surprised the room. Not because it was rude. Because it was final. Elara met his gaze directly. The subject is closed. Another silence. This one colder. Eventually the discussion returned to trade matters. But tension remained. Elara. The encounter exhausted her. Far more than it should have. Afterward she retreated to a smaller office. Closed the door. Stared at nothing. A familiar sensation settled over her. Not panic. Not fear. Numbness. As though her emotions had withdrawn behind thick walls. The healer called it emotional distancing. A protective mechanism. Useful during crises. Less useful afterward. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She considered ignoring it. Instead, enter. The door opened. Lord Vale stepped inside. He immediately noticed something was wrong. She could tell. What surprised her was what happened next. Nothing. No questions. No concern disguised as interrogation. No attempts to fix anything. He simply placed a folder on the desk. The revised transportation reports. She blinked. Thank you. He nodded. Then paused. The council meeting was difficult. A statement. Not a question. Yes. Another pause. You handled it well. Something tightened unexpectedly in her throat. Not because the compliment was extraordinary. Because it wasn't. Simple. Specific. Focused on her actions rather than her emotions. You don't need to defend every decision you make. Arjun said quietly. Her gaze lifted. What do you mean? He considered the question. When someone ignores a boundary, reinforcing it isn't a failure. Silence. The words settled slowly. When someone says no, he continued, they don't owe an essay explaining why. For a moment she simply stared at him. Then she looked away. The idea felt unfamiliar. Almost uncomfortable. Years of politics taught the opposite lesson. Explain. Justify. Defend. Convince. The possibility that a boundary could simply exist seemed strangely radical. Eventually she nodded. I'll remember that. Arjun, that conversation stayed with him. Not because he thought it changed anything. Because it reminded him how often trauma distorted expectations. People who spent years fighting for safety sometimes forgot they deserved it. Even after circumstances changed. Especially after circumstances changed. Recovery wasn't about erasing pain. It was about rebuilding trust in reality. One small piece at a time. Elara, her next healing session occurred 2 days later. As usual, Corvin noticed things immediately. You seem thoughtful. I had a conversation. The healer waited. She described the council incident. The boundary. The aftermath. The words Lord Vale had spoken. Corvin listened carefully. Then nodded. He was correct. She sighed. Everyone keeps saying that. The healer smiled. Perhaps because it's true. I know. A pause. I just don't know how to believe it. The admission felt uncomfortable. Yet not as uncomfortable as it once would have. Corvin folded his hands. Belief often arrives after practice. She frowned. Meaning? Meaning you don't wait until something feels natural. The healer's voice remained gentle. You practice it repeatedly. Even when it feels wrong. Especially then. Elara considered that. The logic made sense. Unfortunately, many correct things remained difficult. Arjun, by late spring, another routine had emerged. Entirely by accident. Garden walks. Not formal meetings. Not private appointments. Simply conversations that happened while crossing palace grounds between responsibilities. Sometimes they discussed logistics. Sometimes governance. Sometimes books. Once they spent 20 minutes debating whether historians exaggerated the importance of great leaders. Elara argued yes. Arjun argued mostly yes. The distinction somehow occupied an entire walk. Neither seemed to mind. The conversations felt easy. Low pressure. Predictable. Grounding. Though neither of them used that word. Elara, one evening she realized something surprising. She looked forward to those walks. Not intensely. Not romantically. Simply. Looked forward to them. The realization made her stop walking. A guard glanced at her in confusion. She continued moving. Heart slightly unsettled. Master Corvin often asked whether there were people around whom she felt safe. Her answers usually involved obligations. Trusted advisors. Healers. Childhood retainers. Important people. Reliable people. Necessary people. For the first time, another name entered her thoughts. Lord Arjun Vale. The realization wasn't dramatic. Just honest. And honesty, she was beginning to learn, mattered more than drama ever would. That night, Before sleep claimed her, she reflected on the past several months. The nightmares still came. The grief still existed. The fear remained. Nothing miraculous had happened. Yet something had changed. Very gradually. So gradually she had barely noticed. When panic appeared, she knew what it was. When boundaries were crossed, she recognized it. When difficult emotions surfaced, she no longer immediately ran from them. Not always. Not perfectly. But more often than before. Progress. Small. Incomplete. Real. And somewhere amid meetings, reports, healing sessions, and garden walks, she had stopped feeling entirely alone while making it. End of chapter 4.